Hi again, folks. Here we are. It's another Sunday night in the great pandemic. Wonder how long this is going to go for. So, cheers to everybody. I hope you're all surviving. I hope you are being kind to yourselves and to one another. And, a nice little piece of ice. And maybe being creative, but you don't have to be creative. Remember, we don't find ourselves with a lot of time on our hands. We find ourselves with a crisis on our hands, right? So just do the best you can each day. I'm going to tell you another story tonight. Do you have your candles lit? Did you pour yourself a nice glass of courage? Because this is a story that I don't tell very often. Because it's just so weird. And it's, but after last week, I mean, how weird can you get, right? So, I'm going to just tell it the way I tell it. Rachel's been begging for this one for a while. This took place when I was 15. Actually, when I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time in this place that was extremely haunted and spirit-filled. I was very much into theater. I loved acting. And from the time I was in 8th grade, 9th grade, I was participating in the local community theater group. And we put on musicals. It was so much fun. I was in the chorus. I had like one or two lines. You know, I was a kid, and I was very artistic, so I always helped with painting backdrops and doing all kinds of other fun stuff in this theater with this theater group. And they were doing some stuff at the high school, and then they found a venue that was really amazing. Now, when I was a teenager, we lived outside of Chicago in the burbs, and there was this huge Divine Word Seminary in Northfield, Illinois, and it was near my high school. I went to a Catholic girls' high school, and this seminary was like 1,000 acres. It had the huge building. It was a seminary for the Divine Word Brothers, and they were an order of missionary brothers. And it had been built in the late 1800s, first as an orphanage for boys, and then it was used as a training school for boys, and then later it became a seminary, and now it has transformed into a retreat house. But when I was a teenager, it was a seminary, and it had, like I said, tons and tons of acres. It had one main enormous building with a huge, like a chapel in it that was just gorgeous. There was a small chapel, but then there was like almost a full-size chapel church with the high steepled ceilings and all the cool accoutrements. On the side with the main building of the road, there was like a busy street that divided it. On the side with the main building, they had all kinds of pathways and gardens and a lot of religious statuary and other outbuildings. And one of those outbuildings was a theater. And it was a theater that had not been used in decades, like since the 40s or something, and this was the 70s. And so our theater group, the Civic Players, signed up a lease for it and leased the building and set about upgrading it. I mean, when we first went in there, it had 40 years of dirt and dust in there that needed to be cleaned out. It had the old really hot lights on the stage, so the uplit lights like in the Roadhouse Saloon picture. So the theater company put in new lighting. This place was amazing. Outside the theater, there were other buildings as well. There was, of course, a gift shop over on the one end that sold religious items. And then across the road, they had farms. And this was a working farm. They had dairy cows, they had horses, they had fields and fields of crops to feed the animals, corn and hay and oats and things like that. And it was a self-sustaining farm village to help train these brothers so that when they were shipped overseas, they would know agriculture and be able to help in the community and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it was this really, really amazing place. And the theater itself was like a time capsule because it had a small house. You know, the house is where the audience sits. So it had a house for about 200 to 250 people with the old wood-backed, that pokey velveteen seats, seating. And it had, the stage was this amazing stage. It was like a professional theater stage. It had the room on both sides of the wings, and you could go off both sides of the stage. One side had the green room, and it was actually a green room, and on the green room side there was actually a makeup room that wasn't the main. There were dressing rooms on the other side. There were individual dressing rooms, and there were probably 8 or 10 on the same level as the theater, and then another same amount, 8 or 10 in the basement. So there were lots of dressing rooms in this place. On the side with the green room, there was a makeup room with a whole wall of mirrors and, you know, the counters and stools and stuff. And then upstairs, there were like prop rooms and costume rooms. And there was this costume room that was filled with all these amazing costumes, from everything from Gilbert and Sullivan plays to, you know, Shakespeare, and just these amazing costumes. So my friend Jenny and I were really active in this theater group. And I had other friends that were, but Jenny and I were like uber enthusiastic, and we volunteered all the time to go help and build sets and clean up and do all this stuff because it was so much fun. And it was, for me, it was just so much more fun to hang out with grown-ups who treated me like I had value than the people at school that treated me like I was just this weird kid, which I was. But my gifts were recognized by the adults in the theater company, let's put it that way. And so I love spending time there. And Jenny was like my BFF at that time. She was a year younger than me, and she was so bubbly and always smiling, this big, huge smile, and just her expression was like, oh my gosh, that she would say stuff like this all the time. She was great. And she and I were like thick as thieves. We hung out together there all the time and did all kinds of amazing fun things. Like when we were asked to go and look through the costume room and see if there were any viable costumes that we could use for our productions, we like gleefully lit up those stairs and went in this costume room that had like princess dresses and all this amazing stuff. And what's the first thing we did? First thing we did was find the ones that weren't like decaying and crumbling, and we stripped down to our skivvies and started trying on all these amazing costumes. It was like playing dress up in probably the best dress up closet one could hope to ever imagine. So when we went and did this, the first time we did this, there were this long stairway that went up to the costume room and a door at the top to the costume room. And there was nothing else. There wasn't a hallway there. It was just stairs to the costume room. So it wasn't like somebody could be around the sides or something. But we're like giggling and say, let's try on some costumes. And we started to get undressed, and immediately it felt really uncomfortable. And now I grew up in a family with lots of kids, and so getting down to your underwear wasn't all that big a deal, especially with Jenny. I mean, we were really good buddies, but I felt like it just felt very uncomfortable. I felt like somebody was watching us. And I checked the door, I'm like, it just felt like there was a peeping Tom is what it felt like, and the door was open. We didn't have the door closed, but we didn't hear anybody come up those stairs. Although there were, this was a theater company, so I imagine there were some creepy guys there that would have loved to sneak up and watch two young adolescent girls get undressed and try on costumes. So I went over, being the elder, and checked the door, and I said, who's there? And went over by the door, and there were like 20 stairs down, okay? So it isn't like somebody could like run away. It was like we looked at each other, both feeling like somebody was there. And I said, who's there? And went right to the door, and there wasn't anybody there. So we giggled and said, well, we're just, just, this place is so creepy. And it was so creepy. I mean, you would feel just like being watched all the time. Well, we kind of ignored it and kept trying on costumes and went through all those amazing costumes and found ones that would be useful, and the decayed ones we unfortunately discarded, but things that had really cool buttons or like bead flowers or something you were able to take off and keep that kind of stuff for props or whatever. So we were there all the time doing this kind of thing. This one Saturday, we would do it Saturday afternoons. And I remember I was 15. Now, when I was 13, I got sick. And I was up north and in Wisconsin, and when I came back, I had this like terrible flu. I just got so sick for a really long time. I mean, I couldn't lift my head sick, and fever, and it felt like a real serious flu, and we never went to the doctor. So of course I didn't see any doctor or anything, but it literally lasted almost 2 weeks where I was in bed for like 2 weeks. I remember some friends coming to visit me and me barely being able to lift my head up. And then after that, I just never got well. I never regained my energy. And about 6 months after this flu, I started to have really severe pain in my body, in my joints, and started going to doctors to try to figure out what was wrong. And I had been misdiagnosed at age 15 with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And at that diagnosis, the doctor told me, at that time, this was 1970, I guess. He said, he talked to my mother. I was sitting there and he spoke to my mother, and he said that there was no cure for it. You could do some treatments. As soon as he said rheumatoid arthritis, my heart jumped in my throat, because my grandmother had rheumatoid arthritis and she was in excruciating pain and very crippled. And so he told me juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and then he said that my mom said, well, what does that mean? What do we do? And he said, well, most people with this don't live beyond their 30s. And so I was 15 years old, and I was told that I wasn't going to live beyond my 30s. And he said, but at that time I could barely walk. I had so much pain in my knees. I know I'm digressing a little bit here, but this is pertinent to what happened there. And so he did this like experimental surgery on my knees to try to scrape away some of because what was happening is my own body was deteriorating the joint tissue. And so they did like a cleaning of my knees, opened things up. And back then it wasn't like knee surgery today where you could do it laparoscopically. I mean, they did an incision about this long and ripped everything open. And that March, I was in the hospital for like 3 weeks after this surgery. And so now it is the first Saturday in May. I'm not on crutches anymore. I'm not in a wheelchair anymore, but I'm still hobbling quite a bit. Back in those days, they didn't, I don't even remember. I had very little physical therapy in the hospital, and then there was like no follow-up. It was like, I don't know if they just thought, well, why bother? She's not going to really get better anyway, but I don't know. But it was just, it was not like it is today. So I was hobbling quite a bit, and so I was no longer able to be in the choruses. I was able to sing, but it was hard to be on stage and be able to move freely and act anymore. So, and at this time there was going to be one more production, and I was an assistant director, and I was the makeup girl. I loved doing makeup. And I helped design and paint sets and things. So I was still participating. I just was galumping around. I was pretty impaired, I suppose, physically impaired at that time. So it's the first Saturday in May, and there's this huge work bee. And the work bee is to close everything up for the season and store everything and prepare the backdrops to store. And the anybody from the company was invited to come that Saturday, first Saturday in May, to help with, closing up the theater and preparing everything. So Jenny and I, of course, went. It was a beautiful day. It was like one of the first gorgeous, sunny, perfect spring days where the flowers had just bloomed, unlike 1st of May here. But it was this gorgeous day, and we were going to be inside this dusty, dark, old theater. Do you hear that? That banging and howling? That's the wind in my chimney. Anyway, so we were in this dark theater on this bright sunny day, and several people were working on the dressing rooms, cleaning the dressing rooms. There were others, I don't know what they were doing, tying up, I don't know what other people were doing, but I know that Jenny and I, our job was working on one of the backdrops, and the backdrop needed some repair and some paint touch-ups. Now this theater had the 2 stories above the stage, and it had all of the catwalks and all of the places to hang the backdrops, so you could raise one up and lower another. It had one curtain in front and another one behind, and then one all the way in the back. It was this amazing theater. I remember standing on the stage, and not this day, a different day, and with I guess it was that morning, and Jenny wanted to climb up in the catwalks, and they were way up there, and they were just these, just these iron, rickety, narrow places. They weren't made for children, and you had to climb up this metal bar to get up there. And she's like, "Come on, let's go on up and check it out." And I'm like, "Dude, I can't climb up there. Go for it." And I was standing on the stage, and as she's climbing up, I got this serious butterfly and rush in my stomach, like fear for her. And it wasn't like I was afraid she was going to fall. I felt like she was going into something bad. And I watched her climb up, and I was watching all around really closely because I felt like there was something up there that was like a darkness or something, and it just felt really nasty. It didn't feel very comfortable at all. And I'm like, she's up there and she's running around up there. She says, "This is so fun. Look at it, I'm up here." And I'm like, "Okay, come on down. We should get to work." She's like, "Oh, you're no fun." And I said, "Please come down and let's get to work." And she's like, "Oh, okay. Oh my gosh." And she climbs down the ladder, and I'm still watching up there as she's climbing down. I'm not watching her climb down. I'm not worried she's going to lose her footing. I am watching up above because I feel like something's going to push her, or something is going to appear, or something is going to come from there. I don't know what I thought. It just creeped the heck out of me, and so I was like on guard. So then we're sitting on the stage, and we're giggling and talking and working on this huge backdrop that took up like the whole stage almost. And the house was dark. The only lights that were on were just the work lights over the stage. So there were no like spotlights around that would impair your vision. It was like just overhead lights on our work area. But the whole theater was dark. And when we had come in, we had used a side door to get in, and the front doors, which were behind the house, were locked. Now, from where we sat on the stage, you could see all the seats. There was one main aisle down the front, down the middle, and then there were aisles along the walls on each side. And we had repainted the walls with these real mod, like swirly lines and stuff to make it look really cool. But so you could see those, and the walls, you could see into the theater fairly well. And then there were 2 small doors on the sides at the end of each side aisle, and then just a single door, and then double doors in the middle down at the end of the main aisle. And as we were sitting there, or not sitting there, but as we were working and just kind of giggling and just talking, and Jenny takes the paintbrush and paints her nose to be silly kind of thing, and we're like, "Come on, let's get to work." And all of a sudden we heard the doors open and just boom, boom, and close. And so we just stopped to look up to see who was there. Now, as I said, the front door was locked, but outside of those doors into the theater, there was a lobby, and then the doors outside of the lobby were the ones who were locked. And then to the right, there was a door that actually opened into the row of dressing rooms. So you could access, like if you were backstage when the play is going on, you could go down those dressing rooms and go and access the main aisle so you could enter from there, that sort of thing. So we thought that maybe somebody had come in down from the dressing rooms and had just come in those doors, and we both at the same time looked up and looked back there, and I started squinting, and I looked over at her and I said, "Did you hear that?" And she said, "I heard that." And I said, "Hello?" And there was no answer. "Is anybody there?" No answer. So, well, maybe we heard one of the dressing room doors. We hadn't heard a dressing room door. But that's what we said. And so we get back to work. And now it just feels a little uneasy. You know, it feels like we did up in that dressing room. It felt like somebody was watching us. And not like watching us like I gaze at my children, but watching us in a leering, icky kind of way. And I couldn't see anybody. And I checked both the other side doors, you know, that if maybe somebody was going to come up and try to spook us. Now, we were always talking about how it was haunted. Jenny and I were always telling the rest of the company about our experiences and how we're sure there are ghosts here. And, you know, I'm sure this is haunted. And the director, the supervisor, Kathy, said, every theater is haunted, and you guys should save the drama for the stage, kind of thing. Like, just, you know, you're just freaking yourselves out. This is just an old theater, but, you know, it's the ghosts of all the actors and the ghosts of all the great performances. You know, she was waxing profound. Anyway, so we thought that maybe it was one of the company members that was going to come and try to scare us because, you know, we were easy and we were the kids. And so I kept looking and nothing. And so I just ignored it and went back to the work we were doing. And we were up in the corner of the backdrop, and the paint had come off, and we were just repainting this one part, the blue part up there, and then dabbing on clouds. You don't need to know that, but all of a sudden there is this loud whack in the back of the theater, like a flat hand whacking the back of one of the chairs in the back of the theater. And we both just jumped and looked back there. And as I looked back, I saw a figure starting to form right at the very back of the theater in front of the back doors. And the first thing I saw were these eyes. And these eyes were not friendly, furrowed brow, and these like piercing, really threatening eyes, like kind of eyes. And as I look, I'm looking at this, and I sort of side glance, you know, I don't want to look away because I don't want to lose sight of this thing and, you know, this guy and what's he going to do kind of thing. And I can see out of my peripheral vision, and Jenny's looking horrified. She says, oh my gosh, do you see that? And I'm like, I see that. And then it started to materialize more. Just slowly it materialized until I saw that it was a monk. He was wearing a monk's robe, and he didn't have the hood, but he had the big cowl neck, you know, and his hands were tucked in the sleeves, and he's just looking at us with this really fierce look, and then he starts moving toward us. Now, he did not start walking toward us. He started gliding toward us ever so slowly enough at first that I could convince myself that my eyes were playing tricks on me. Just this slow glide towards us. And I looked, and I noticed that he was about 1.5 to 2 feet off the ground, just floating towards us. And now he's moving closer, and now there is no denying that this thing is coming right for us. And his gaze is fixed in my eyes. I feel like he is like holding me there with his eyes as he is coming closer and closer and closer. And all of a sudden, Jenny screams, "Oh my gosh, we gotta get out of here, run, run." And she jumps up and she grabs my hand for me to jump up and run. But remember, I had had surgery in March. I could not jump up and run. And she runs for the door. And I'm trying to get up, and I had to get up where I put my hands down and my butt up, and I had to, I had to get up like a camel kind of thing. And he's coming closer and closer all the time. And I, boom, 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 limped out of there as fast as I could. And she is waiting by the door. She said, "Hurry up." She grabs my hand, and we go running, screaming, both of us just squealing and screaming down the stairs to where other people are. And Kathy comes out of the room where she's working, and she's like, what are you doing? What's going on?" We said, "We saw a ghost. We saw a ghost." And she says, "Knock it off. You guys are freaking yourselves out again." She said, we said, no. We saw a ghost. There was a monk. And then Jenny says, "And he didn't like us very much. And he was coming right at us." And she says, "This is baloney. We're never going to get this stuff done today if you guys keep playing around with your ghost stuff." And we're like, we are not going back in there. We refused. We said, "I'm not going back in there with just the two of us. That ghost is in there, and we're not going back in there. Period. The end. Unless somebody wants to come with us and be there with us, because this is just crazy. I'm not doing this again." And she says, "Okay, fine. Well, how about you guys take this pail of water and go. We've only done 5 dressing rooms down. The last 3 or so need to be done. So why don't you start at the one down there and just clean the dressing rooms where the rest of the people are." And so we said, "Okay, we'll do that." So Jenny picks up the bucket and the rag, and we walk down and we find the first dressing room that hasn't been done yet. And she's holding the pail, and the door is closed. And it's towards the end of the aisle. We went back upstairs. We were in the upstairs dressing rooms. There were other people working in dressing rooms up there. So we weren't in the basement dressing rooms where we had found her. We had gone upstairs to the ones upstairs. And these dressing rooms were these tiny little closet-sized things that had a little like vanity type area with a mirror, a rack to hang clothes on, and a very small window up high that was covered with like one of those paper window shades. It wasn't a big enough window to have one of the pull-up shades, but so it was like this translucent, really yellow, dingy light coming in through this up high window there. And I opened the door, and when I opened the door, there was this just blast of frigid air. Now, it was early May, and this place had been closed up, and it could have just been the cold air in the room, but it gave me a whole body shiver and rush when that door opened. I just felt, and Jenny was just standing there. She says, turn on the light. And the lights were not the flick switches. You remember the old-fashioned lights where you had to turn the click knob to do it? And I'm reaching around the door, looking for, trying to find the switch, trying to find where the switch is. And this room is pretty dark. It's just got this little dim thing. And as I'm trying to reach for the switch, I see in the corner of this tiny little room really close to us, I see this same monk begin to manifest. Now, in the theater, he was just in shadow. You could sort of make him out and stuff, but it was pretty much a shadow. This time, this monk began to glow with like this weird bluish white glow, like if you get a blue glow stick at a festival and it's almost worn out, that just very faint glow light. It wasn't casting any light. It was just like glowing from within. And at first I just saw shoulders down and the hands and the thing, and I'm like, oh crap. And then when the face manifested, and this happened fairly quickly, he had that same look, those piercing eyes and that furrowed brow. and he was becoming more and more materialized. And I didn't know if Jenny saw him, but I saw it, and I sort of took a step backwards, and instantly she dropped the pail, screamed at the top of her lungs, ran down the hallway, down to the door that opened up out to the lobby, and also out there was the side door to be able to come in. She ran out into screaming, "We got to get out of here, get out of here, come on, get out of here, come with me." And I'm trying to follow behind her. She burst through the door, and this bright sunlight floods in. I feel like this monk is like right there with me, and I'm going as fast as I can, but it is just not fast enough. And I get the door is swinging closed, and I'm thinking, oh my God, if that door closes and I'm here in the dark, that monk is going to be right here with me right now. And so I just got all my energy and just tried to sprint and grab the door, and it was still open a crack, and pushed it and pushed out into the light and pushed that door closed. And it was so bright outside. It was a full bright sky, and we'd been in the darkened rooms for hours, so my eyes hadn't adjusted, but there was a brightness to that day that was just amazing. I couldn't see anything. I'm, rubbing my eyes and squinting and shielding my eyes, and I'm moving away from the door, moving away from the theater, and Jenny is way up ahead. There's this path that leads right out of that side door, up around toward some gardens and trees and whatnot, contemplative path, and she is running up ahead squealing, come on, we gotta get out of here. And I am making my way along as fast as I can, which isn't very fast, and it's painful, and it's difficult, and she's way ahead of me. And finally, I have to just stop and take a break. I'm far enough away from the building that I wasn't scared anymore. And so there was this little, on the path, there was this little turnout, there. And in it, there was a tall white statue of a woman. And there was a lot of Catholic statuary around this place. And this was just, it wasn't painted or anything. It was just like concrete but it was really white. It was very fine concrete, if it was concrete. And it was the strangest statue. It was of a woman that was pretty expressionless, looking straight ahead with her two hands on her heart like this, just looking straight ahead. And it was about 7.5 or 8 feet tall. Are you hearing that? Are you hearing that? Oh my gosh, the flu is going crazy. Anyway, so this statue is there, and I'm looking up. Now remember, I told you I'm a little Catholic schoolgirl, right? So I'm curious as to who this saint might be, because in my Catholic high school, I was studying the history of the church, and which was fascinating, and I learned a lot of history about a lot of terrible things from learning about the history of the church. But I knew a lot about the different saints, and I'm thinking, I'm being Miss Smarty Pants and trying to figure out, which saint is this? And most of the statuary had plaques or some kind of something depicting what it was. And this had nothing. This had no indication whatsoever what it was. I knew it wasn't supposed to be the Blessed Virgin because she's always in a veil. And this had like long hair, just straight hair, very androgynous looking face, but the two hands on the heart just standing looking out. I'm not sure what it was. And so I'm looking up and I'm trying to figure out who the heck this statue is and why is it right here. And so I'm looking up at the face and trying to remember my saints and who would be one of the women saints who would be like holding her heart. I knew it wasn't Saint Teresa. I knew it wasn't, this one or that one. And as I'm looking up at her, all of a sudden there's this rushing in my ears. And it's like as if a wind starts to blow. But I felt like it was starting to get really windy, but the rushing in my ears was in my ears. And the wind started to blow my hair. Now I had long hair at that time, and it was like my hair was blowing in front of my eyes, and I kept trying to push my hair out of my eyes, but my field of vision kept being just blocked by these strands of something. And I'm looking up at this face and squinting in the sun when all of a sudden the face changes. Doesn't turn into the monk, don't worry. It just morphs like that like that Michael Jackson video, you know, where all the faces just morph one after another. This is way before any of that technology was available. But that face changed into a different face. And it sort of startled me, but I couldn't see it because I had this stuff. And then it changed again. And then it changed again. And it wasn't like click, click, click change. It was like the features moved into a different face. Like that morphing software. And one after another face just was like superimposed on this white statue. And I'm just watching all this as this stuff is blowing in front of my face. So I grabbed my hair and I pulled it behind my head and held it, looking up so that it wasn't pulling there, and still there was something blocking my vision. And as this is going, pretty soon the face is changing like in every millisecond until like 1,000 faces are passing before my eyes. And I'm watching all this with this rushing in my ears, and these faces just change. And then I hear this like a booming, it wasn't really booming, it was like an all-encompassing voice. It was a voice that filled everything. And this voice came from within and from without. And it was, I feel like it was a female voice, but it was like a deep female, it was a female voice, but it was a deep female voice. And it said, "There will be 3. And I'm like, what? And the face is changing, and it's just changing. And then all of a sudden I hear Jenny call my name. Come on here. And I looked over to her, and instantly there's no wind. There's nothing in front of my face. And I look back at the statue, and it's completely the same. And Jenny is way up ahead. She says, "Come on, I'm going in the grotto. Come check this out." And I'm so confused. And I'm not sure if this was like a ghost thing that had happened to me or what this was. I have no idea what it was, and I didn't know what it was then, but I was like, okay. And I was just I was in like shock. I don't know what state I was in. I felt like I was not myself. I felt not myself as having been possessed or something. I just felt very out of it. Maybe the rush had caused me to have a seizure. I don't know. We could probably figure out some medical reason why this happened, but maybe not for what happened next. So I made my way to where Jenny was, and she had found the grotto. And this was this grotto everybody had been talking about. This is a grotto that had been handmade by one of the old monks, the old retired monks there. And it was made of stone, field stone found on the property, and earth and rough concrete. And so from the outside, you could see an entrance, and there were these stone steps that went down. There were like 3 steps, 4 steps that went down. It was dug out. And then there was a mound, so it was like on a hill. And on the outside, all kinds of flowers and shrubbery were planted on this mound. But and Jenny disappeared down in this thing. So I went down the few steps carefully, and inside it was a diorama, a life-size diorama of the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, I don't know if you all know that story, but it's the garden is the place where, according to the story, the night before Jesus is taken, he goes into the garden and prays and asks that the cup be taken from him, that he not have to suffer, and then he just comes to terms with accepting his fate in the garden there. So we're down in this grotto, and it has a life-size plaster painted statue of Jesus, and he's kneeling, and he's leaning on this little, like one of those prayer things that all the priests lean on, and his hands are folded, and he's looking up with this pleading expression on his face, and the paint is peeled and chipped, and right above, and then there's these plastic flowers, these dingy, dusty plastic flowers all around, so it's a garden, you know what I'm saying? And Then there is a stone and rough concrete wall that blocks off the viewing area where you could stand to this diorama, and that's about 2 feet high, like knee high, a little bit higher than knee high, blocking off this diorama. And then above, there was a skylight that was covered with something that was like a filtered light coming in. So it wasn't like open air, but it was shining light right down on this statue of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I'm just standing there looking at it and thinking about a lot of things and thinking about having to accept one's fate. I was dealing with a whole lot for a 15-year-old at that time, just feeling a great affinity for it and just feeling, a lot of understanding for someone who is faced with something that is not what one would choose, And so I'm just looking at it, and all of a sudden Jenny just grabs my hand, and and I looked at her, and she's not looking at me, she's looking at the diorama, and she's got this terrified look on her face, and she squeezes my hand really tight. And I'm like, what? And she says, look, look, look. And so I look over at the statue, and I'm like, what? What? I thought maybe there was a mouse there or something, I didn't know. She says, look at the statue, look at the statue. And so I did. And the first thing I noticed was that the plaster painted hair looked super soft, and it moved just a little bit, like real hair. And then I looked down at the robes and the places where the chips had been, because I noticed the chips on the ground off of the statue. There were no chips. It looked like real fabric. And then I quickly looked up towards the face. Now I'm getting scared. I feel like I'm going to throw up. My heart is racing, and it's like, the fuck. I didn't say that in those days, so it's like, whoa, oh my gosh. And I'm looking at this thing, and I look up, and I'm afraid to look at the face. I am really afraid to put my eyes up towards the face. But as my eyes move up, I see the swallow, the Adam's apple move, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And now I look over at Jenny. I'm watching this thing and looking at her, and she just has tears streaming down her face, and she is frozen. And then I saw the face from chin up turn into the face of that monk. The pleading look turned into a furrowed brow, and that face very slowly started to turn toward us. And there was nothing between us and this right now but a 2-foot little stone wall. And we were underground with this thing manifesting right in front of our eyes, and we were terrified. And when I get terrified, I sometimes get really angry. And I said, get out, get back. And it kept turning and looking at me, and now it's got this like grimace. Ugh, it was so awful. And I was like, we have to do this together, we have to do this together. And I said, give me your hand. And we were holding onto each other's hands, and we both held our hands up. And I said to it, leave now, get back, you have no power here. And I felt this rush that came not from me, but through me. And it was like it came right out of the center of my body and both of our hands, and we both jumped at the same time as this thing, this energy. It was like, it was nothing you could see, but it was so tangible. You could just feel this force, this push, and boom, instantly this thing is back a statue. And Jenny's like, oh my gosh, and she runs away again. And I'm like, dude, I can't run away. But it was gone. And she's like, come on, we got to get out of here. And she goes leaping up the steps, and I'm like, step up, step one, making my way out of the grotto. And I hear her squealing and screaming with delight as I make my way out of that grotto back into the bright sunlight that was so hard again to see. It was like we were in and out of darkness, in and out of darkness. And I look, and she is running. She says, "Come on, look at this, look at this." And I see her running, and on the other side of the grotto where you come out, there was the path and more of the garden, but then beyond that was this big open field. Now the horses were paddocked across the road. There were no horses on this side of the road, but somehow a horse had gotten out and made its way across the busy road and into this big, huge field that was, you had this big, huge field, you had a pathway, the cemetery's over here, and there was a pure white horse running through this field in circles with Jenny squealing, running after it. "Oh my gosh, we gotta catch this horse! This horse got away, we gotta catch this horse." She's running like crazy through this field, and I'm watching her, and at first I'm like going, and I realized I couldn't go. And I all of a sudden had a realization that I would never be able to go, that I was going to be on some other path, that she could run off and chase a white horse, but I wasn't going to be able to do that. And I felt really sad, and I felt like I knew I was going to also lose Jenny, and that we would lose touch with each other, and that our paths would just take very different places, different directions. And it just made me really sad. And I wasn't okay. You know, I always say I was really sad, but I was okay. I wasn't okay. I was just really sad. And so I turned away from her, and I walked toward where the path went, and I saw that it followed. The path led to a little cemetery that was a cemetery that held people from the first time it was, the seminary was made, when it was first an orphanage, all the way till today. But it only housed brothers or other people who had dwelt on that seminary. It wasn't like a public cemetery. Just a second. I gotta drink this lump in my throat. And leading the way to that cemetery in true Catholic fashion was a pathway that had the Stations of the Cross along it. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Stations of the Cross there's 10 stations that track the path of Jesus to the crucifixion. And as a little Catholic girl, all during Lent, we would do the Stations of the Cross, so I knew them very well. Each one was one step along the journey toward his final torture and death. And so I'm walking along, and the way that these stations are made is they're on like little pedestals that are made of that really rough, lots of sand and gravelly filled concrete with field stones. And then there's a top and like this arch over it, so you've got this little hollowed out, like little cave-like looking thing out of the stone, and inside is a miniature statue depicting each of the Stations of the Cross. And the markings on each of the pedestals is like just the Roman numeral 1. And then I walk to the next one, and it's just this crunchy, gravelly, overgrown path. It's not walked very often. It was way after Lent, so that's probably why. And then the next one is number 2, and there's another statue there, and I'm just walking along, just contemplating all of this, while off to my right, Jenny is running freely like this flower child through a field, chasing a beautiful white horse. And I got through all the stations, and then there was one extra one, and that one had in it a miniature of Michelangelo's Pietà. And I studied art in school, and I did sculpture, and I did a lot of like making clay and then plaster casting it, and so making sculptures out of like modeling plasticine clay. and then making plaster casts and sculptures like that. And I was working a lot on figures, and I was just so fascinated by Michelangelo's work, and the Pietà was just the emotion that was depicted, that is depicted in that work of art, just the lines of the drapery and the expressions on the faces of those. This has always been one of my favorites ever since I was a little girl, but it was especially at this time. And I just looked at that and I just went, oh, remember I was feeling sad, and it just shows so much sorrow, so much sadness. And I was feeling like it was a gift, that this is not something that just I feel, that this is a universal human feeling. And I was looking at it and just contemplating its beauty. And all of a sudden, in this beautiful work of art, I noticed it begin to morph and change and flesh out. Granted, not life-sized. Granted, not 8 feet tall. But this was like a 12-inch high thing, and the face of the dead Christ begins to morph into that very same nasty, I don't say evil, it was just not a nice thing, nasty face. It starts to morph. Now, when I tried to cast that thing away in the grotto, I could not do it alone. I grabbed Jenny's hand and I said, we have to do this together. And I looked and I wanted to call to her to come. I knew I couldn't run away. And I wanted to call to her to come help me, and she was too far away. And I looked back, and it is turning, and it is directing its gaze right at me, and I got pissed. I said, how dare you? How dare you embody something so beautiful made by the hand of a master? Get out and never, ever bother me again. Get back. I am done. You have no power with me. Be gone. And again, this time for my own body, I felt like somebody was with me. Somebody was behind me. And it wasn't as monumental as in the grotto where it felt like a lightning bolt. This was just this energy that I felt like I had... I have goosebumps right now because I remember so much how it felt. It felt like there wasn't just one person behind me. It felt like there was a multitude behind me who just went and pushed it away. And again, it was this beautiful, bright spring day. And tears are coming down my eyes, and I just feel so safe and so loved, and so, the expression, I've got your back? This is like, it was the epitome of, we've got your back. I was not afraid of anything. I was not afraid of anything I was going to have to face in my life. I was not afraid of the surgeries that were already scheduled that I was going to have to endure again. I was not afraid of a life of becoming more and more crippled, a short life. I was not afraid of any of that. I knew that I was not alone. I knew that it was going to be okay. And then I looked, and there was no number there. There were just words. There was like a smooth place where there were words that were like carved into the concrete, and it was so rough it looked like in the wet concrete somebody could have written it with a stick or something. But I couldn't make them out because they were so weathered and so faded. And so, what is Rachel saying? What's the name? Oh, I'll tell you the name of the seminary in a bit. So I couldn't read it, and I wanted to read it because I knew the words were important. And so I took some dirt and took a little handful of dirt and rubbed it on the relief so that the dirt stuck in the letters. And I started with the first word and it said great. And I'm like, great, great. Great as the sea is my sorrow, is what the word said. And I stepped back, and I had just experienced something that was great as the sea. I was experiencing sorrow that was great as the sea. And then I realized I was not alone, and I was going to be okay. And then I heard that same voice. I'm always very uncomfortable. Rachel knows this. I've talked to her about this, telling her I was going to tell this story. I'm very uncomfortable telling you what this voice told me, because I've thought it was for me only, and I've thought that it just sounds just way too bizarro, or that it could be misinterpreted as to what it means. But in light of all my experience, it made perfect sense and still does to me. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and if you want to just think I'm just batshit crazy, that's okay. When people think you're batshit crazy, it gives you a lot of leeway for your behavior. But here's what the voice said. Clearly, that same rich female voice, like the voice of the mother, of the great she, said, great as the sea is my sorrow, but no longer. For you are clean and alive and reflect all I know. And tears just started pouring from my eyes. And I felt so full. And I felt so energized. I felt like where I had felt weakened before, I felt just full of all the love that the universe has for each and every one of us. I experienced it there. And I looked off at Jenny, and I just kind of waved to her, and she's still running around. And I turned and I started to walk back toward the theater. I didn't go back in the theater. I went and called. I sat outside and called for a ride home. So I'd often wondered, I was talking with Rachel about this just recently when she was asking to tell the story, and she said, I said, I have no idea why that happened. I mean, that was so weird. All this, one thing after another. I have no idea whether there will be three, unless it was the three incidents. I don't think so. I think I'm still trying to figure out all of the cryptic messages in that day. But then she said to me, she said, well, was the day somehow auspicious? Was it like a special, important day or something? Was it some kind of an initiation or some kind of a, some kind of bat mitzvah kind of, thing? And I said, I don't know what it would be. And then I remembered, of course, this was the first Saturday in May, the year that I was 15, and I know I was 15 because it was my first surgery. And Maggie wasn't around to ask her what day of the week that first or what the date of that first Saturday of May would be, because she could figure it out in a couple minutes. But I've got my Google Calendar, and I've got Google, and so I just Googled what was the first Saturday in May in the year that I was 15, and it was the 1st of May. It was Beltane. It was Beltane. Beltane is an initiation day in the ancient calendar. It's an important day of awareness and awakening. And I'm thinking that perhaps that was my first Beltane, where I actually experienced what Beltane is. And I celebrate it every year now in various ways, including, I told you about the fairies. So I think that's what that was. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. It's a weird one. I've got really strange things that have happened to me. If once again, if I had been alone through all that, I could have chalked it up to a vivid imagination or something else. But Jenny and I experienced all of it except for that final step that I had to go through alone, that I had to realize alone. And it was at that point that I realized that no matter what my life had in store for me, I was going to make a difference. And that's what I did. I made every choice in my life for joy. I made every choice to leave something behind that made the world a better place, thinking that I was going to have a short life. Imagine the reprieve I got when I realized it was a misdiagnosis and now I'm an old woman. But I still do that. I still try to leave the world a better place. We all can do that. So there's my story tonight. I'm glad you listened, and I don't think this is the stuff of nightmares, except the frickin' monk I still have. I could still picture his face, and it scares me. It will, they'll state between sleep and awake, where you close your eyes and you see the scary faces. I will still see that face. I don't know whose it was, but it's there. So y'all have a good night and a good week, and I'll see you next week for another story. If you have suggestions for stories, please make a comment on the Facebook page. Share it with your other friends. I'm keeping all the stories up, so so if you want to share any of these with friends that aren't seeing them live, you can watch the recording of it. I love you all. Have a good night. Peace out.